how do you play a religious character in D&D, particularly clerics and paladins? Because you have to remember that if somebody's religious, if somebody's actually become a cleric or a paladin, then the religion is a big part of their lives. And so often, we just overlook the religion. I mean, I've created clerics in the past when I was younger that I didn't even know what god they were following. Or if I did know, then all I really knew about the god was that they were either lawful good or maybe evil, but usually some kind of good, lawful good or neutral good. And paladins in particular, of course, are notorious for being lawful good. It's sometimes called lawful stupid. And part of the reason for that is those religions don't get fleshed out. So we have these very stereotypical black and white views of good and evil that we work with. And that's not what religions are. Religions aren't good, they're odd, they're controversial, they're full of idiosyncrasies and little hypocrisies. And without that tool set, if we're not creating that tool set, then we're not creating a proper religious character. So, I mean, ask yourself this. If you were a paladin and you had to save the world in the modern world now, and you had to get somewhere really quickly, would you steal a car? Even if you didn't steal a car, would you drive a car too fast? If you were getting on a plane and it was an emergency, you had to get to this other country quickly to stop Cthulhu rising from the depths, and there was a hermetic Jew on the plane who had been seated next to a woman who was causing a scene that was delaying the flight's takeoff, what would you do? So good and evil really aren't good enough to determine the religions that these characters are following. We need to understand the grey areas. We need to know what those grey areas are. When you read the Dungeon Master's Guide, for example, all it really says is Asmodeus, god of tyranny, is lawful evil, his domain is trickery, and he has a symbol that's 3 triangles in type formation. And that's kind of all it gives you. It's not enough. We've got to flesh that out. And quite often this will impact the game world itself. If you're portraying a religion that's in the world, and the GM's running their own world, then you need to work this out with the GM when you create the character. And you need to understand what the core tenets are. What are their commandments, if you like. The Torah for Jews, for example, has about 576 commandments. The Old Testament has 2, under which hangs all the Torah commandments, and then there's 8 that are kind of a summary, sort of the big ones, some of which kind of talk about the same things. And then you get the New Testament, which is 10 commandments. And what are those? And can you have a paladin in a religion that says thou shalt not kill? You need to understand where the hypocrisies are in the religion to allow you to break those tenets. So let's do that now. So I got it slightly wrong. It's not 576, it's 613 mitzvot in the Torah. And it's a great place to start just because there's so many and they've got some really odd and peculiar ones, such as to honour the old and the wise. I mean, that's a fantastic one. Why don't more religions have that? Not to wrong anyone in speech, not to stand by idly when a human life is in danger. Not to refrain from maintaining a poor man and giving him what he needs, to give charity according to one's means, to lend to an alien at interest according to tradition. This is mandatory. Well, that just kind of sums up everything that's wrong with the world right there. Forbidden sexual relations. Ooh, touchy subject, moving on. So, dietary laws. I'm pretty sure in here there's somewhere about not eating misshapen grapes. If I can just... Oh, thou shalt not eat fresh grapes. Thou shalt not eat dried grapes. Thou shalt not eat the kernels of the grapes. Thou shalt not eat the skins of the grapes. So as we've seen, the Torah is a great source of inspiration for odd rules. And you just go Google rules of the Torah, and you'll find stuff. I mean, there's so many that you're bound to be able to pull some ideas from that if you need some. So when you're fleshing out your religion, I mean, what I would say is you need a few tenets to live by, 5, 10, whatever. Avoid the 10 commandments, because that's just playing a Christian, and unless Christianity is a religion in the world, it kind of doesn't work in D&D, because D&D is a world full of different diverse religions, and you've got sun gods, moon gods, river gods, and all sorts of peculiar deities, and so find think of odd things your character would have to live by that will help characterize the religion and will help justify some of those awkward positions. I mean, we all know the prisoner dilemma, right? The old problem of if you've got orcs and they surrender, do you kill them, do you set them free? And it's been a source of many an argument in many games over the decades. And part of the reason is because when you think about lawful good and what that really is, what are the laws? Every country has different laws. Every religion has different things it considers to be good. So what are those things? And without knowing those things, you're missing off the biggest part of playing a character or a religious class, or of a lawful good alignment even. So try to remember that lawful good is, as an alignment, isn't necessarily what we consider to be good. You can be good and be a completely horrible person, as long as you define what good is for your character. I like to think of lawful good as lawful bastard, because you can be a really horrible, terrible person and really surprise people, but according to your moral code, what you're doing is good. Now, please don't confuse that statement with the stuff before about religion. I'm not saying any of those religions are evil. I'll let you make your own mind up. But you can, you have the flexibility to do that if you flesh out the legal system or the religious system that your character follows. I think it's a mistrick that GMs kind of underuse this actually in their world settings of having different laws in different places. About the only sort of thing I think I've ever really seen with it is slavery being used in some places, not in others. But you can go deeper than that. So have fun with different rules, with different laws and tenets, because there's a lot of opportunities there to really add some great colour to the world. But whenever you do it as a player, don't force this stuff on your GM. Because, I mean, for example, in my campaign that I'm running in real life at the moment with my friends, I created a religion right at the start of the campaign. So if one of the players had come in saying, I'm going to be a cleric or Paladin or whatever, that would have just destroyed the world that I was setting up. I'm now introducing a third religion into the game later on, and I'm not going to cover that here. But you have with both religions and legal systems, you have the opportunity to do new things with your games, and with your GM's approval, by working with the GM, there's a whole new world of role-playing to explore. Half-orcs have always struck me as a lost opportunity.
Uglug hit thing. Uglug like hitting thing.
I mean, it's not a character with a great deal of depth, is it? Now, some people do successfully bring half-orcs to life and give them more depth, and they can be quite interesting. But I want to do a little history lesson here. We all know D&D, of course, was to a large extent inspired by Lord of the Rings, and the original orcs were much closer to Tolkien's original vision of orcs, where they were a society. Now, as a society, as Tolkien said himself, they made no nice things. They weren't an advanced society, and they were, they didn't appreciate nice things. They didn't, it was kind of like the opposite of elves. But they originally came from elves in Tolkien's world. So, in the early editions of D&D, that was orcs, and goblins they were like red, orange, or yellow skinned, and it was when the fear of lawsuits from the Tolkien estate changed them, and I think it was Games Workshop who sort of came up with the practice of right, our orcs are now green, and they're warlike and brawdy and simpletons and stupid and stuff, and I don't like that. Especially when you're playing a half-orc and it's like,
I hit things. I like hitting things.
it's, really, that's the depth of your character. So, let's today talk about barbarians and fighters and role-playing those characters and how we can bring more life to them. Now, the classic image of the barbarian is, the fur-wearing man from cold places on the world, which conjures in my mind image of Norsemen and Vikings. And when you look at Viking culture in particular, there's some nuances there that we kind of forget today. We tend to think of the Dark Ages as this primitive time when they thought the earth was flat. But in actual fact, Vikings were sailing as far as the Americas, they were sailing to the Africas, they were traders. They would come to a place when they needed something or wanted something, they would trade for it, and if you refused to trade them for it, for what they considered a fair price, then they'd kind of unleash Valhalla on you. But yeah, that's kind of it. They have this reputation as Viking raiders, rah! But raiding results in people dying. So they didn't tend to do that very often. They would do it only when they needed it. They come from a climate where if the crops failed, they'd go sail somewhere and say, "We'll buy your crops. We want this many." What do you mean we can't have them? Rah! And one of the other interesting things about Viking society is it was very egalitarian. It was a very equal society. I mean, for years and years we thought that all these Viking graves of warriors were men. Nobody thought to actually check the skeletons and find out. Now some people have argued that they were just women of status buried with their swords and armour because they died from a position of status. Well, you can argue semantics all you like and try to put our modern perceptions of the past onto the past, but the past was the past, and it happened to the best as we know, the way that as what the facts tell us. When you try to ignore that and just try to insert your view of the past onto it, then you can get whatever you believe that way. Doesn't mean it's true. So Viking society was famously egalitarian. As societies go, it's very equal. So there's something you can bring to a barbarian character that wasn't there before, right? Now, what about our half-orcs? Well, they live in a warlike society, apparently. So, what do the women do? They stay at home and pop out more babies for fighting? Or are they expected to pull their own weight? Are they expected to contribute to the clan by having to do exactly the same things? Why not? Why not? Life's tough for an orc. You get killed by adventurers all the time. There's no time for not pulling your weight, staying home to look after the grubs. Let the grubs fend for themselves. The strong will survive. Just been checking the book on the primal paths of the berserker. And the first one's interesting. It's one of the most common misconceptions in fantasy role-playing games that berserkers go into a frenzy. Rah! The word berserker in Norse actually meant a champion. So, is your berserker the champion of its people, of their people? The best fighter from the tribe who's had to head off into the world to, for some tribal purpose? Or does your barbarian want to become the berserker of the tribe? Is doing the whole coming of age quest to sort of go out and prove his worth in the world, has to come back with X amount of gold to prove that they're worthy of being the berserker of the tribe. The other path that I've not seen anyone play, I've seen a couple of people play the berserker path, but I've not seen anyone play the spiritual path. And that's really interesting because that sort of conjures up images of, you know, the Native Americans and, you know, dream states and stuff like that, you know, having spirit animals and spirit guides. So there's that aspect. Why not bring that into your game? Now we tend to think of fighters as the class that didn't have any other skill. Yeah, might be the peasant became a fighter because, well, they didn't have a trade, or the city guardsman who went off adventuring until they got an arrow in the knee. And that's maybe missing an opportunity for a deeper character. Somebody who fights is somebody who, you know, who brawls, who you know, didn't have the academic ability but had the physical stature. Could have been a blacksmith, for example, somebody very strong, or maybe just, you know, didn't really have the aptitude for spellcasting and such, but it doesn't make them any less a hero or any less interesting as a character in terms of their personal story. So what can we do with the fighter to make the fighter more interesting? There's 3 martial archetypes. You've got the champion. So this sort of conjures up an image of a lord or a lord's champion, you know, the knight, as it were, Knights Templar and stuff like that. Just somebody who's not really a paladin because they're not religious. They're doing it for social status instead, working for a lord or a baron or something. But is, you know, just as worthy as a paladin, just as much a champion. But remember, a champion isn't necessarily somebody who's good, it's somebody who champions a cause, or in worlds like D&D, in a feudal society, a champion is somebody who champions a lord's purpose. The other, well, there's the Eldritch Knight, somebody who dabbles a little bit in magic, and there's, you know, that's kind of interesting in the you know, in a magic heavy world. Or maybe, you know, you might say in your campaign that an Eldritch Knight is as magical as the world gets. You know, you don't actually have actual magic users. If you're doing something more swords and sorcery, maybe that's as close to a magic user as you'll have in your whole campaign, except maybe the bad guy at the end. You know, doing the whole swords and sorcery thing. What's the other martial archetype? You've got the one who's into martial fighting. I've always kind of felt martial arts don't necessarily fit D&D, but that's because for a long time I was thinking of martial arts as Oriental. And yes, Oriental games, great, absolutely perfect fit, nothing wrong with that. But Oriental culture doesn't necessarily mix with the traditional sort of European flavour that most D&D campaign worlds tend to have. The whole sort of Middle Ages stuff. But martial arts never have been limited to just the Oriental world. For example, did you know breakdancing comes from originally a form of African martial arts? Europe had its own martial arts, tended to be with weapons, you know, rapiers, dueling and so forth. Dueling is a form of martial art. So somebody who studies fighting from an academic perspective, well, you could have a young squire or minor noble who's, you know, studying the art of war, as opposed to being just the city guardsman who set off on an adventure, you know. Don't take the easy route when making characters. Find an angle that's different to what the last, you know, fight or whatever was played in your character, whatever your character class is. Always bring something new to the table with every new character. So there's opportunities there. If you just sort of try to understand what the classes really are, and then put that in the concept of the world that you're playing in, there's real opportunities to do new things with your characters. Druids. For those of you who've read Lord of the Rings, you know that, well, basically a druid is based on Radagast the Brown. And the thing you notice about the wizards in Lord of the Rings is they go travelling the world and talking to different people and so forth. Just look at Gandalf with all his manipulations of various people. So Druids are kind of like that. Whether you're Circle of the Moon or Circle of the Land, you are meant to kind of meet up in Druid circles and perform rituals. So, do you know what those rituals are? The Druids are kind of meant to be natural and all about nature, but whatever the Druidic rites in the game world, you kind of ought to know what they are, or at least know what your key festivals are. What does your Druid do on the winter equinox or on the summer equinox? So there's like twice a year where you've got this opportunity to be really Druidic. So what rites do you perform? Do you go sacrificing animals, or do you do the opposite? Are you all about protecting animals? Are you just about balance and therefore killing one's not really an issue, especially if it's in large numbers? Do you actually do that? Do you go, well, there's a few too many foxes and not enough rabbits at the minute, so let's go out and kill all the foxes? And then vice versa, when there's rabbits, do you go hunting tons and tons of rabbits? Because there's too many. What kind of Druid are you? What do you really stand for? In terms of your natural balance, because they're all about balance in nature. What form does that balance take? Druids are meant to sort of exchange the oral tradition of Druidic, not Druidic lore or Druidic knowledge when they meet. So what Druidic lore does your Druid already know? So when playing a Druid, you kind of maybe ought to think about working with the GM in terms of what are the Druids doing in your world? Where do they meet in the world? If you're just starting a campaign, odds are you know nothing about the world. Well, perhaps in your session 0, you ought to maybe find out about the place where you meet and where it is on the world map, and where it is that your character usually roams and guards the forest. Or maybe you're not a forest druid, maybe you're a mountain druid. You can be anywhere, but obviously probably more rural than urban. What are the rites that your druid's secret druidic lore is all about? Bards. Bards are awesome. So whether you're in College of Valor or College of Law, you're going to have a place in the world where bards meet. That's kind of the point of them. There's this college that you go to. So the College of Valor, there are mead halls with great fires where you sing around, telling tales and orating stuff. So this is more of the oral tradition. So if you're in the College of Valor, where are the mead halls? You're going to work this through with your GM. So you'll know some of the bards. You might like some, you might hate some. I mean, when you look at the first edition bard, for example, back in the... Was it first edition or was it second? I can't remember. Back in the old days, a bard would have to go so many levels as a fighter, then start over again as a thief, do so many levels as that, and then do so many levels as a magic user, and then they could start off as a level 1 bard. So being a bard was like proper hard. You were like the elites, you looked down on everyone else because they hadn't gone through what you went through. And then if you were a higher level bard, you looked down at the lower level bard because, well, basically bards were bastards to each other. So, and until eventually you became top level, and then like, I'm going to share my knowledge with all the bards, for some reason. But anyway, so bards in modern D&D, they're in these bardic colleges, and those colleges should exist in the game world, because if they don't, you're missing a part of your character. And so often, I'm just going to create a bard, and then off you go and do it. And which of the colleges are available in the world? The College of Law. These are the bards that are more about the written tradition, right? So they're going around the world collecting bits of written tradition, or if they hear something orally, they'll write it down. So does your character carry a quill and paper, and when he hears something, does he take the time to, write the story out, and does he add a bit of extra colour into the story than what really happened? Does your adventuring party have somebody who keeps a journal of events? It's actually really handy for GM if there's somebody who sort of writes down everything the party does. So if you're a College of Law, well, that's you, right? And ultimately you'll be looking to get that writing back to a library somewhere, the College of Law. So I like to do that, as the world will have a great library somewhere, and that's where the Bards are. That's what I've done in my current campaign. There's nobody playing a Bard, but I have Bard NPCs, and that they're all sort of centred around this great library. You have to have a magical flute to open the doors, and there's only 11 bards and stuff, loads of extra sort of detailed bits of lore that you can't do if you don't know where your college is. So as a bard, find out where your college is. And who were you before you became a bard? What's the entrance requirements to the bardic colleges? Is there some special requirement that you have to have? Does the College of Valor only recruit from peasant folk, and the College of Law only recruit from educated folk? Maybe they get all their recruits out of the Wizards College. Apprentice goes to learn about wizard, and then the College of Law's like, hey, you show some real potential, we'll have you. Don't go learning that stuff, we'll teach you. It's really important. Do they go off recruiting bards? There's so many opportunities that come from just detailing what that college is. Oh, you want to watch him? He's one of them rangers from the north. Yes, Strider was a ranger. He was probably nothing like a D&D ranger. He was more about being a Numenor than he was about being a ranger. But he was the inspiration for the class back in the old days. I don't know, I can't think many times, because once he got the sword, he was all about that sword. So was he really dual wielding? Was he bow slinging? Kind of odd that how the D&D class has evolved. Maybe I need to go back and read Lord of the Rings again. So long ago. Why do rangers dual wield? But dual wielding is fantastic in D&D. It's less good in real combat. You tend to find that what tends to happen is you have a main weapon and a little weapon, and you keep people focused on your main weapon and actually hit them with your little weapon, which in the real world does not do less damage. A sharp edge is a sharp edge. Because you're not holding a shield, you're having to actively defend. So, with your sword, and then your smaller weapon, just nip in. Can you dual wield with 2 long swords? I've tried that. Anyway, the whole sword and dagger thing is a style called Florentine. Presumably because it was popular in Florence at some point for dueling, I guess. Don't know that much of the history. For some reason, every time I decide to read up on that, I start thinking of defenestration, which I think actually began in Moscow or Kiev. But anyway, I'd never get round to properly researching that. So, Tempest is a great archetype though, and I love doing Tempest class rangers. You just do so much damage, and it surprises people as well because they kind of expect you to be all about the bow. But yes, the hunter archetype, that always makes me think more along the lines of Red Riding Hood, to be honest, but a Red Riding Hood that fights back with a bow. There was a film I saw recently, it was Avengers Green. Really, really rubbish B-rate movie. I don't recommend it. It's okay. It's kind of terrible. But that has a Red Riding Hood who's all about shooting the beast with a bow. There's not much you can really add to that. They're hunters, right? They're that archetype. How can you make that more interesting? Well, take a tip from Tolkien. Add something else. Strider was a Numenor, and he was a king and everything else. and was in love with an elf and all of that stuff. He didn't focus too much on the ranger. Does that mean rangers are boring? No, far from it. But a ranger is, by nature, somebody who goes off hunting, a solitary person. Maybe not as solitary as a druid. They obviously still interact with society, but they're looked down upon. There's somebody that walks into town with animals over their back and so on to sell and, making scratch a living from the land from. And obviously people who respect nature and understand it. Maybe not with the same affinity as a druid, but, they have a relationship with nature and understand its two ways. So it's not necessarily an uninteresting character or something you can't bring a new thing to, but it does limit your options somewhat. And it's a shame, it's one of my favourite classes actually to play, because I love doing the whole Tempest thing, even though I know it's ridiculous, and especially if you can do it with 2 longswords in D&D, that's just fantastic. I must try that at some point. Can you actually fight with 2 longswords? I suspect my left arm isn't going to have the control it needs. But anyway, can you add more to the hunter archetype? Yes. Think about tribes in the world today that still hunt. And there's all sorts. You've got the barely contacted communities in the rainforest in the Amazon. There are various African tribes that are still tribal to this day. And there's some very rich cultures there, in Ethiopia, drinking the blood of a cow straight from the cow. What culture does your ranger come from? Is the reason that they're a little bit of an outsider to urban civilization, is it because they came from a different culture, so they've never really fully integrated? You've also got the Beastmaster, of course, somebody who just loves animals and prefers them to humans. I can relate to that. There's why does your character get on with animals better than humans? Is it because they appreciate what animals bring into their life? Or is it because humans are a constant source of disappointment? Rogues. We have there's a stereotype for rogues. There's 2, in fact. First is that they're orphans or street kids that became thieves. And the other is more of a gender stereotype. Like if ever you look at pre-generated characters from a module or a new game, almost always the token female will be a rogue, or sometimes a magic user. So let's throw those 2 things out straight away. So there's 3 archetypes of rogue. There's first of all the thief. Now, your thief or your burglar. So whenever your burglar goes into somewhere, they're going to be casing the joint. They're going to be looking at things in a very different way. And so if you're a burglar by profession, you're looking automatically at how a place is defended, how is it secured. You're looking for the valuables, where are the valuables kept. Is there a picture that's not quite straight that might have a safe behind it? And how, if you see one, what do you do about it? Do you just sort of adjust the picture for them but take a little sly look? Do you ask questions that might not seem relevant to the plot? Because you just want to know, how would I break into this place? I would scurry up this drain pipe here, go through this window here, but what if there's someone in the room? So the room's very clean. How often do the maids come in? Might not seem that relevant to anyone else, but to a burglar it's really important information. Taking that approach to it. Does a burglar necessarily have to come from a poor walk of life? No. But they would certainly have a different attitude to possession and ownership. It's my experience that people who are generally thieves tend to take a more passive view of the concept of ownership. So for example, I've got to get home. How do I get home? Well, I'll use that horse. It's there and I need it, therefore I will use it. Once I've used it, discard it, throw it away. Possessions are less valuable to a thief. Even nice things are more transient, because the whole concept of possession is transient. Things are only your things when you need them. So that's in my mind the burglar. About the assassin. What does it take to be that person who wants to take life? Somebody who has experienced that taste of power and wants it again, wants to do this thing for a living. Well, this is a person with a very warped worldview just to begin with. If you're going to play an assassin, you're accepting the fact that you're playing some kind of sociopath or psychopath. So you're going to be a manipulative person, possibly damaged psychologically. For you to, let's face it, an assassin, if they've committed, 6 people in 6 different locations, that's a serial killer. You're playing a serial killer. So, there's so many references to serial killers in pop culture. I don't think it needs much more than that, because there's so many sources of inspiration to take from. But of course, serial killers often have a preferred way of killing. Is it you're going to be like the one from the Saw movies where you like people to kill themselves, give them a way out or something like that. There's all sorts of approaches you can take with that, because you're playing a damaged person. Damaged people are fun to play. I'm now actually tempted to play an assassin. And last, of course, is the arcane trickster. Okay. This is a matter of self-confidence, because if you were that good as a rogue, you wouldn't need magic, right? So if you feel that you need to supplement your skill as a rogue with some magic, it's for one of 2 reasons. It's either because you're not really that confident and you want to get every advantage you can to try and ensure that you survive. You're paranoid of being caught, paranoid of dying, paranoid of consequences. So any edge you can get is one worth having. Or it could be a matter of superiority. Doing it the hard way. I just cast knock. Sorry, I forgot the name of the spell there. I just cast knock, and I'm in. Everything's a breeze. I'm perfect. A couple of different ways Arcane Trickster can be played. Why did your character turn to magic to help them in their quest to be a better rogue? If I was going to play a magic user in D&D, with all the options available, you've got Sorcerer, Warlock and Wizard, I think Warlock is the most tempting, because they're already the most flawed characters, because they get their magic having made a pact with an otherworldly being, whether that be a fiend or a demon or maybe a god, who knows. But as a player of a Warlock, you should know, and so should your DM, and that relationship with the creature you've made the pact with should be fleshed out. Is it something you regret, or is it something you're positive about, and is there a reason you made this pact? So, are you doing it, did you do it to save someone and this pact is a sacrifice? Or is it a boon? Is it something you entered willingly because you're a great hero and you're the person, the creature, or deity, entity that you made the pact with is somebody who has the same belief and vision as you, and chose you to be their avatar. So there's opportunities there. I would favour one of the more flawed options, but you can be a great hero with a Warlock too. It doesn't have to be a demon or a devil. But maybe you were that desperate, and if so, why? Sorcerers, the accidental magic, I think it would work better if you were already another class and you're accidentally casting spells, and if they didn't go off terribly conveniently. But to kind of do that, you need the GM to work with you. It's like, okay, so we're playing a first level game, can I be a first level monk or whatever, but actually, can I also be a first level sorcerer, but you control the sorcerer aspect of me, or something like that. Make it really uncontrollable and wild. But at the same time, that means you're kind of second level to begin with, so it doesn't really work. So, yeah, I mean, how do you make the sorcerer more interesting? Because you can be anything as a sorcerer. It's just you have this magic welling up inside you. I have to say I'm much more tempted by the Warlock. But yeah, somebody to whom magic is innate and just flows through you. Yeah, there's possibilities, but, you know, they're just not as cool as the Warlock. Yeah, and, you know, why do sorcerers' faces always end up blue in D&D? It's gonna happen sooner or later. That's not really enough of a curse, to be honest. This wild magic table, this needs to be about 4 times the size. We need one for each type of spell. For abjuration it's this, for conjuration it's that. And you know, I think in some ways also you kind of get too many spells as a sorcerer. Maybe it should be more random. Maybe you can't control exactly what you're going to cast. Maybe it's right, I cast an abjuration spell. I've got 3 available. What are they going to be? Or you know, maybe if your GM will work with you, maybe sometimes you'll cast a spell that you actually don't have, something much higher, and then sometimes it'll be something much lower. Depends really what the GM's up for in terms of your sorcerer power. Wizards are obviously educated people, and that limits your options in terms of background if the world isn't as articulate. So that's something you need to work with your GM on to understand what the setting is. If it's a world where people can't read and write, then you're going to be very limited. It's obviously going to be somebody of the higher classes who's a wizard. So if if reading and writing is common, then your wizard could be common, but how did they get the books to learn this craft? Did they have potential and then had to give up their family to go and study? Did they have to leave their family young, or was it something that there was a kind mentor would teach them, or is it something that's passed down in the family from some witch in the past? So yeah, there's opportunities for wizards too. So the one class I've left off so far is the monk, and I think to a large extent that's because I've never played one. And I think it's already kind of clear from the book exactly what they're meant to be. You know, if you're way of the fist, way of the serpent, all that kind of stuff, it's straight out of Kung Fu. If you know anything about Kung Fu and its origins, you know, it was an Indian guru in China who taught some techniques to some monks in a monastery, and then that evolved into Kung Fu, and now there are places in China where Kung Fu is just a way of life, and they get up at 4 in the morning and practice their katas, and there are 11-year-olds who could easily kill you in China, so don't upset anyone in China, seriously, don't. So yeah, there's I suppose the one thing about the monk though is, much like clerics and paladins, is they're very much tied to a monastery. So what is the faith? Much like clerics and paladins had their religion, should be a big part of the character, therefore you need to understand the religion. I think that's also true of monks, but of course a monk is, you know, fixed in their purpose of perfecting martial arts for the same reason people do martial arts today. You know, there's basically 2. It's either a spiritual quest or it's an ego-driven testosterone quest. So, you know, it's not a hard one to do. So yeah, those are all my tips or just ideas to throw into some of your characters. So I hope you enjoyed them. If you use them, let me know how they go. Tell me in the comments, in the commenty bit down there. I tried that and it worked. Enter. Or that didn't work at all. That was a stupid idea, and I think you're slightly insane, and I hate you, and I'm going to unsubscribe. Enter. Actually, if that's your opinion, then whatever. They're just ideas.